From the studios of Books in Motion, this is Bryce Clifton reading The Litter by Kevin R. Doyle. Now, let's begin with the prologue. He was new to this city, but he seemed pretty much like the other three he'd lived in during his short life. Of course, he couldn't know about the nicer sections, if any existed, any more than he knew anything about the better parts of those other cities. As soon as he stood on a street corner and shivered in the late-night cold, he accepted things as they were, not even pondering whether fate had consigned him to only see the bad parts of wherever he lived. They called this particular neighborhood the Zone. Storefronts with, at this time of night, steel shutters locked down. A bar at each end of the block with neon signs, half of them unlit. And furtive, shadowy people looking out from alleyways, no doubt wondering just what they could and couldn't do in the presence of a small boy, looking no more than 12, who possessed the eyes of someone far older and wiser. 12 was probably the right age, more likely than not, and since last winter he'd been thinking of himself as 12, so before too long he'd have to change it up. Then again, with the shortness of his stature and scrawniness of his limbs, he could pass himself off as 12 for another year or two with no one the wiser. Not that anyone would know or care. Across the corner, a large shape stumbled out of a bar, weaving a bit before heading off to the north. A second or two later, a woman, wearing a jacket far too light for the weather, came running out after him. She only made it a yard or two before stumbling on the pavement and going down on both knees. Instead of getting up again, she knelt there and cried, screaming after the man as she pounded the pavement with her fists. A couple of teenagers lounging in a doorway a few steps down the bar laughed at her. Yeah, the kid thought, just like the lower section of the other cities I've lived in. Victims everywhere. And where you find victims, predators can't be too far behind. For a minute, he thought the two teens were going to do something to the woman, maybe beat her up a bit or drag her off somewhere into the shadows. Instead, they just laughed, then turned and went back to their drinking and smoking. After a while, realizing that no one was going to pay any attention to her, or not care much at all even if they did, she staggered to her feet and headed back into the bar. "Ho!" one of the teens called out, which didn't even cause her to turn around. A biting cold wind came skrilling down the street, and the kid hunched his shoulders and clasped his arms across his chest. The outerwear he wore wasn't much, a bedraggled old-time ski vest, polyester-filled and dark blue. It zipped all the way up to his chin but didn't have any sleeves. The lady at the homeless shelter had lent it to him, offering him gloves and a stocking cap at the same time. It was on his first night there, but at the time he figured on staying for a while, and so he had turned down the gloves and cap, thanking the woman for the ski vest. Unfortunately, a couple of goons slouching in a corner and eyeing him a little too closely had activated his personal radar, causing him to change his plans, and he'd taken off early the next morning, considering the full dinner and night on a warm cot as better than he'd had in months. He headed out on the streets again. A car came squealing around the corner, someone leaning out and throwing an empty bottle in the kid's direction. He ducked, glass shattering on the wall behind him, and the car continued on its way, drunken curses floating on the night. The kid stood still for a moment, face reddened and fists clenching, but he knew it wasn't anything personal. The morons hadn't been attacking him, just anyone small and defenseless who they happened to come upon. He spent his whole life small and defenseless. He cinched the zipper of his ski vest a little bit tighter, jerking the collar upright so that it would be partially covering his ears, and headed off down the street. He had no clue where he was heading, or when he would eat or sleep next, but he'd been on his own for years now, and had come to learn the way of the streets. He figured nothing could come up that he hadn't encountered before, and he managed to stuff way down deep into an obscure corner of his mind the longing memories of warmth and comfort the shelter had offered the night before. He was a survivor, always had been, and as he wandered down the nearly deserted street in the early morning hours of the Zone, he had no doubt that he would continue to survive. And that was the last that anyone ever saw him. Part 1. The Pack.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?